I didn't hear you. Yeah.
He's still in Europe.
There's a lot of ice.
Yeah.
But well, he sent me an email, so
He's responding.
next time. Yeah, Dennis doesn't want to be technical services anymore. Just couldn't. You know, he sent me the next day, he said he wants to continue. I felt like saying, thank God. Oh, good. Are we on the
We'll get started up in another minute or two.
Was he at Jimmy?
No, he never made it.
Maybe I can hear it. Yeah, try again.
Yeah, I know the computer. All right, turn this off.
QSL. Here it's out, I mean, for your eyes. Okay, you're my first. Why was it? There you go. Which works in New Zealand?
Well, fixture.
Jim thought that maybe the band A, which the only thing.
There's two bands, A and B. I think the digital only goes on A.
Okay.
That's the way the first radios were.
So you switched it to band A only?
Yeah.
Okay.
Channel 48A.
Should we get started?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sure.
All right, so welcome everyone to the September meeting of the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club. I know we have a few folks joining us via YouTube this evening, so hello, everyone out there on the internet. We can turn this around, we'll see some of the folks who are here. So, yeah, we're staying off the grid. We got witness protection program. All right. All right, so as we do normally, we'll go around the room with a round of introductions. I'm Jeremy N2, ZLQ Club President. Ned, WQ3Z.
Bob, W3ZQN.
Jim, W3, JNF.
Michael, N3OMR.
Jeff, WA3RIZ. Lou, WX3I.
Mike, M3QLC.
All right, thanks everyone, and welcome everyone who's watching on YouTube. I know we have a few people traveling, a few people getting over illnesses, so this is great. So whether you're joining us live or you'll be joining us from the future, welcome. All right, so let's get started in terms of things that are going on. Lou, you want to give us the treasurer's report?
Okay, we currently have $18,898.94 in the bank.
Are you kidding me?
That's at the park.
Is that after Bob?
Oh, that's not after Bob, I haven't gotten his paperwork yet.
Would you like to,
Okay.
would you like to adopt a camera club?
Talk to the president.
Hostile takeover.
Not counting what I need to settle with Bob, the Hamfest netted $2,902.52. So that'll be lower once we get those successes.
Did you ever send me a check?
Current, what's that?
Did you ever send me a check?
Oh, I did, okay,
You've heard that before.
yeah.
He normally doesn't send mine, but I got.
Yeah, he's different. I think. All right, and we have 83 members on the books.
All right, give a quick update on repeaters. Dennis is overseas at the moment. Unfortunately, we are having to restrict some activity on 444.05 temporarily, having some temporary technical issues. Hopefully we'll get those resolved as soon as Dennis is back, probably within the next week or two. So in the meantime, if you do try to check in on 444, you might be wondering why it's not connected to anything. That's why. Other repeaters are coming right along. We do have a couple of projects. I'm sure Dennis will update us on that in the near future. So let's see, we've got a breakfast coming up on Saturday. Ned, you want to give a quick plug?
9 a.m. Andy's Diner, Ridge Pike, outside of Conshohocken, near the north junction of the Northeast Extension, and 476 the Blue Route. If you've never been to a MARC I walk you so breakfast, And we hear you on the repeaters on the way in, it's breakfast on cue.
All right, thanks, Ned. See, the next thing coming up after that is going to be the PA QSO party. That will be the weekend of, I think, October 12th and 13th. It's the second full weekend in October. So this is gonna be our third year doing this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of our fall field day, so it's a little bit smaller, a little bit more informal. We do participate in the PA QSO party. I think last year, I think we got close to 60 counties, is that right? It was something like that, and a number of section multipliers. Yeah, we got quite a few. That was with pretty cold weather too. I remember my fingers were freezing.
60 out of 67.
Yeah, that, we did really well.
It was the hard ones that we missed.
Well,
The ones, more moose than people. Those are the hard ones to get.
But yes.
Yeah.
Plus the meats.
It's meese. Yes, we will be there. I think maybe we'll do a little Zoom meeting the week before, just for last minute planning, because we have to get the equipment up from Brian's house. Probably do the usual setup around 9 AM. Yeah, Jeff.
I will not be able to assist you on that in any way this year.
All right,
Sorry, I really was looking
we'll
forward.
figure that out.
well, we're not time restricted on that, right?
It runs from noon until midnight on Saturday, and then 9 AM to 5 PM on Sunday.
But it's not like field day where you've got times that you can't set up before and all that other stuff.
I don't think there's any restrictions. I don't think we
You don't even have to be in the same location, right?
Right, it's just
Yeah.
operating.
Yeah, you can be a little over for that. I think 9 AM is a good time for the setup. We are planning to do a Scouts Merit Badge session. At present, I've got a whopping 1 attendee signed up, so I'll see if I can scare up a few more next week. Because we're gonna start doing the Zoom sessions, actually next Tuesday is the beginning. But we could always push that back a little bit if we needed to. We need some time to get a few more attendees. I think, is there anything more on the PA QSO party that we wanted to mention?
Yeah, the equipment that we have to bring is limited. It's not like field day.
Yeah, we don't need quite as much, we don't need the generator.
Right.
You put in that 10 on those poles?
Yeah, usually we do the 3 antennas. Right, we do the G5 RV, we do the 40-meter dipole, and the end fed. And that gives us pretty good band agility. Because the real money bands are 40 and 80 in the evening for this. That's where you really rack up the county multipliers. So it's kind of that Saturday night, maybe like early Sunday morning is where you really, that's where you get the money. Because otherwise, like 15 and 20 meters, you're getting section multipliers, but then a lot of people aren't in the contest, so you're kind of walking through how to do the exchange. If anyone's looking for information on the contest, actually last year or the year before her, K3YR did a really, really good introduction, so that's worth reviewing. You can find that on the YouTube channel. It was last September or October. You can find that there. He's got a great outline and everything, down to all the legal details. We need to have a lawyer in the club.
Yes.
So that's the PA QSO party. That'll be October 12 to 13. As far as VE sessions, Brian did send me an email. He's unfortunately getting over some nasty respiratory bug. Let me see what he had to say. He said that as of now, we have a VE session scheduled for November 2nd, but nobody has signed up so far. Said we'll wait till October 31st, so hopefully we'll get some attendees. If not, we may have to cancel the session if no one's gonna be there. I think we'll get some people to show up for it though. Let's usually get some last minute. Are there other items?
Well, I can say public service.
Public service, yeah, and maybe elections, give a quick,
Public service, the one in October, the 10-win run is still in limbo. Nobody's gotten back to me on that, so that's a TBD to be determined. The next real hard one is the Radler Run, which is October 27th. That's definitely a go. And we have a possibility of the Vietnam Veterans Run on the 26th, but that's up in the air too. I've been working back and forth with Lou, he has contacts there, so.
26th of which month?
October, they're a day apart, so it's gonna be tight either way. So. Fortunately, the Vietnam run, that requires, a handful, but the Radnor run, we need a good turnout for that, so. Any questions on that? Election,
Definitely the 27th.
27th is a go,
So we'll need to think about communications for that, because that historically has been a challenge.
right,
Because it's too large a range for simplex, and some areas don't get the repeaters that well.
well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just so generally what I just heard is that you probably will want to have a mobile radio.
Well, that's what we did last year. I was like the sweep vehicle, so I was all over the course. But most of the people had a mobile radio. The start finish is tough for a mobile radio because you have to kind of be back and forth there, but. We may have to consider that, but simplex is not gonna work unless Bob can figure out that repeater, that
The simplex
the
repeater.
simplex repeater, which is very confusing to people because you have to do it a little differently. Yeah, it's confusing sometimes.
So the way a simplex repeater works is you transmit into it and it records. Then when you stop transmitting, it plays the recording back.
Right,
On the same frequency.
Yes, so the hard part is, if say Mike calls me and I hear him, I don't know whether I'm hearing Mike or whether I'm hearing the repeater repeat it.
right.
So I have to wait a few seconds to see if I hear it a second time. Otherwise, I will double back.
Crossband is not doable.
I mean, theoretically, we could do crossbands. I mean, the problem is a lot of radios that do crossband don't do it legally because they don't transmit ID.
Right,
Now, they can't do
Yeah,
it.
you
The
can.
TM71, that one does do legal crossband, because it does transmit an
yeah,
ID.
but how many people have those? I mean, I have one, but,
Well, we only need one crossband repeater.
yeah,
We can just get it in a good location,
But you
highest
still,
point.
you still need the small ones to be able to.
You'd have to have your HT programmed for crossbands.
yeah,
If you have a duplex HT, then you put one channel on VHF and the other on UHF.
well, and unless we come up with something, and maybe Dennis could weigh in on this when he gets back. I think it worked out okay last year with the repeater. But we've gotta try to get 50-watt radios to everybody.
So maybe like 1,000, I think I saw on eBay, there's a Valfen. 800-watt handheld or something like that.
800 model.
It gives you tattoos when you hit key it, you know? But any other questions on that? The elections, I sent out an email to everybody if anybody's interested, as far as I sent it to the members, if they're interested. Anybody here, I sent to the board an email separately, and if you're interested in continuing your position, let me know. Cause I'm gonna make up the ballots in a few weeks. Cause we vote in November. So. Most of the people have already said that they wanna continue, so.
Well, nobody reports that I took over for Doug
I know.
on the basis of, I was the temporary acting interim filler. And I said he's been dead like 3 or 4 years now,
2 years probably.
so I think somehow.
Well, on geological scales, it's temporary.
Yeah. But anyway, if you're interested, let me know, and we're not gonna push anybody next, so, you know, that, so. Any questions on the elections, or anybody wanna? Whatever, just let me know, I sent out emails, so. And I have to get with Dennis to change the emails that come to me when we vote, so, when he gets back,
It's a vote counter.
yes. All right,
We did have one final item. As you know, Dick Stewart has served as our BE team's chair for quite a few years. So the board voted at the last, actually the June meeting, to have a little resolution to honor Dick. So I will read this. Whereas Richard Dick Stewart, K3ITH, assumed the critical role of coordinating the work of the team of volunteer examiner coordinators for the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club, whereas Dick coordinated dozens of VE sessions, allowing hundreds of prospective and current amateur radio licensees to demonstrate their qualifications to become licensed amateur radio operators and or to advance their credentials within the amateur radio service. And whereas Dick handled this critical role skillfully with a delicate balance of grace and professionalism. Therefore, be it resolved that the directors of the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club do thank Dick for his hard work, dedication, and service to the members of the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club and the broader amateur radio community. Resolved unanimously by the Board of Directors of the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club on June 11th, 2024, and further attested to confirmation by the general membership of the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club on September 24th, 2024. Thank Dick for his service.
So
That was applause. I know it's nice that doesn't come through on YouTube. It blocks it out. So thank you, Dick, for your service all of these years. All right, so anything else for the good of the club? All right, if not, we'll move on to the evening's featured speaker. And Barry, let me put you on spotlight here.
Let me check. How do I do screen share? There's a button on the Zoom that I can click on screen share. Is that how I start?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Big
All
green
right,
one.
I do that, and let me know if.
Pick the screen.
There it is. You're up. You just need to
All right.
maximize.
So I think I want to set it for a maximum slideshow from beginning and see if this still works.
Yep.
Looks like it does.
So we're
So
very happy to have Barry Feierman, K3 EUI. He's giving part 2 of his presentation on capacitors. What are they and how do they work?
okay, audio and video, okay.
Yes.
And I've got 7:30. And how much time do I have?
No more than 3 hours, including the
Dangerous to tell a physics teacher. Right?
test.
All right, so I had actually sent Jeremy and Dennis, I think, a copy of the PowerPoint slides I had on part 2. And I usually way over prepare, and there were too many, and it was too much detail. And Jeremy wrote back a very kind letter and said, I suggest you cut this, and this, and simplify this and this. So I got back this afternoon about 5 o'clock, and I thought, all right, I got to take Jeremy's advice. And I thought, no, I'm just going to scrap the whole damn thing and start over and just think, what would hams want to know about capacitors? Because as a physics teacher, professor, I could go into lots of gory details that nobody in ham radio probably wants to even consider. So this is a scrap version, Jeremy. So capacitors, and it's funny because I think I mentioned this last time. For some reason, my 9th graders, when I was teaching 9th grade, and I taught a little bit about AC circuits, they would always call them capacitors. I thought, how do you get capacitator out of that word? Anyway, all right, capacitors. So part 1, I sort of gave last time, and I'm not sure how much of what I presented was new or novel, but I think like a 9th grade physics teacher now, it's sort of like ingrained in my head. Part 2 is a little more ham radio related, friendly. What is this thing called reactance, impedance, and resonance? And after I finished those slides about 20 minutes ago, I thought, well, there's more to say. So I have a part 3 about capacitors and conjugate matches and antenna tuners, but that's not tonight. Maybe next year, I don't know. So here we go. If you have a question, please do not wait till the end of the talk because you'll probably forget it and you want to get home anyway. So if I say anything and you'd like to throw in a comment or a question, even my 9th graders would never raise their hands. They'd just say, wait, teacher Barry, blah, blah, blah. So please feel free to interrupt. So I want to start with not capacitors, but resistors. And there's a reason behind that. How do resistors behave in an AC circuit? Well, or a DC circuit for that matter. So resistance is a hard concept in a way to grasp. So what do we do as hams and engineers and maybe physics professors? We come up with an analogy. So resistors oppose the motion of electric charges. That's just says resistors resist. That doesn't tell me much. But sort of like obstructions to the flow of traffic on a highway. You know, if you're driving on a 6-lane freeway and it becomes a 4-lane freeway and a 3 and a 2, you're going to get problems because those cars have to squeeze into smaller areas. So resistance, we can think of an analogy as, you know, the number of lanes on a highway. Resistors can also act like restrictions in a water pipe. Not that we kind of get inside water pipes and feel that, but I think we can visualize as the pipe narrows, the water has more difficulty getting through. So, you know, resistors, resist, oppose, lots of words we can make that are synonyms. It doesn't tell us much, just tells us what the word means. So how about something like this? As charges move through any conductor, a wire, can be anything. But as charges move, they're going to collide with the atoms of that substance, right? And when they do that, they often bounce back and forth and create what we call today heat. So as current goes through a resistor, if you feel it, it gets warm. So more current, more heat. In fact, it's what the square of the current, but we don't have to worry about that. So something that has more resistance and has current flowing is going to create more heat. So the difference, I used to take like 15 watt, 25 watt, 40, 60, 100 watt light bulbs that were the old incandescent, break them open and have the kids look at the size of the filaments, you know, carefully because the glass was broken, and sort of say, well, all these are designed to screw into a socket that's 120 volts. So they're all designed for the same voltage, 120 AC. But look, there's different thicknesses of the wires, and the ones that generate more heat, 100 watt bulb, 200 watt bulb. At some point, I think I had a 1,000 watt bulb. The wires were thicker. I said, think about that. Let's talk about that. So the thicker wire allowed more current, and for a given resistance made more heat. So resistors make heat and light to some extent. So let's start with a 9th grade. No, this is a 3rd grade quiz, but we're going to start with this. Take a look at the circuit. We have an AC generator of some kind, you know, generates a voltage, AC. And we have some, I threw in a switch. When you close the switch, yeah, my 9th graders would say, there's no current, you got a switch open. All right, when you close the switch, predict what will happen here. We have a generator, a good wire. The circle with the A is a current measuring device, an ammeter, and a squiggly thing, a resistor. So predict the current that will pass through this circuit as the frequency of the generator increases. That's what I want you to think about. So you have a piece of paper near you? So I want you to predict the shape of this graph. AC current on the y-axis, frequency on the x-axis. Sketch it what you think it is, and in 10 seconds, show it to your neighbor and see if your neighbor has the same sketch. So I really want you to do this. Find a neighbor next to you. Don't sit alone. You said something, Jeremy, and I couldn't hear it.
I was thinking I was answering.
Everyone has to do this, or I don't want this to be a passive, you know,
Are you able
hour
to see
here.
this?
Okay, so after you've sketched it, just show it to your nearest neighbor and say, here's what I think, and see if you agree.
It's going to be flat line.
Everyone agrees with everyone? A flat horizontal line. Is that what I hear?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So resistors don't, well, to a large extent, resistors don't change their resistance based on the frequency of the charges moving back and forth. Now it's a little different, the value of the current, if you have DC versus AC, but that's not the question. So in other words, resistors behave the same regardless of the frequency, pretty much. Are we 1 for 1?
Unless you have skin effect at high frequency.
Yeah, that's what I said. Just, you know, first order. What's your batting average?
Or the capacitance of the resistor.
Yeah, I know. We're not going there yet. Yeah.
Fixing wire alarms.
All right. Yeah, we get it. Okay. So how do capacitors behave in an AC circuit? So I'm building up to the, you know, the good stuff. So capacitors resist, I would say it this way, changes in voltage. What does that mean, changes in voltage? The voltage goes up and down in a circuit. Capacitors don't like that, and they have a way of flattening that out. they present a kind of AC resistance we call capacitive reactance. Now that's just a name. It doesn't explain how it works. So if I know the name of a bird, it doesn't mean I know anything about the bird. I just know the bird's name. So I wanted tonight see if we get into, how does this work? Capacitive reactance. So you see my next question is going to be what? Let's add a capacitor to the circuit. We still have an AC generator. It goes from, 1 to 100 megahertz or something. And we have a capacitor, C, and a switch. Our ninth graders would say, all right, close the switch, teacher Barry. Okay, close the switch. Now do the same thing. I want you to predict on a piece of paper what a graph would look like of the current in the circuit versus the frequency. So we're back to the same graph. So sketch this graph and check 10 seconds with your neighbor and see if your neighbor agrees. And my picture of you guys in the room is like, 1 inch by 2 inches. So just raise your hand when you want me to continue, or just holler, go. But I want to see if your sketch agrees with your neighbor's. I guess if it doesn't agree, talk to your neighbor a little bit, see. Figure out who's right or who's wrong, or maybe you're both right, maybe you're both wrong, I don't know.
All right, we're ready.
We're ready.
Okay, do all the neighbors agree?
No, that's for you.
Someone diverges from the group? You don't have to reveal who it is, but why don't I give you another 10 seconds to defend your answer if it's not what Jeremy said.
But there's too many factors. I say you can't tell because there's too many factors. Like how
Well, the
big
R
is-
is staying the same, the C is fixed, and you're just going to vary the frequency and, as a first order of magnitude here, just describe the current. Is it still flat? Yes or no?
No.
No. So if it's not flat, is it going up or going down as the frequency gets bigger?
It's a curve going up.
Okay, so I heard Jeremy say it's going down and someone said it's going up. So why don't I give you two guys 10 seconds to talk to each other?
Current goes up, reactance goes down.
No, wait, Jeremy, we're plotting current, not reactance, just the current. We're plotting the current.
Current goes up.
Yeah.
Oh, and I see, and you were explaining why.
Yeah.
Someone else said the current goes down. I don't know who it was.
Having flashbacks to 1973.
All right. Look, you gave me an hour, so all right. I'm going to use up my hour here. So is the AC current going up with frequency or down with frequency or flat? One of those three. All right, good. So the AC current, in other words, the capacitor is behaving as though it has what? Less resistance at higher frequencies. Did I say that right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
The capacitor's resistance, we can call it reactance, I don't care what we call it, but it's behaving differently at different frequencies. Why? Why? Oh, I wanted you guys to talk to each other for a moment. Why? Why is that the behavior? And I don't want to know the formula. The formula doesn't tell me why. It just predicts, how much. Why does a capacitor's resistance or reactance change with frequency? Why? You guys should be talking to each other. I'm going to get a sip of apple juice.
More current if V is changing faster.
Yeah, but why? The graph is predicting that, but I don't know. What's the science behind this graph? Why does a capacitor behave that way? I hear a lot of silence. I should hear people arguing in there.
Yeah, a couple people here that say, I don't know why.
Oh, that's okay. The answer can be, I don't know. My ninth graders would be howling at each other and fighting and yelling at, like they love this kind of method because it gives them opportunity. It gave them opportunity to show off or be an idiot in their mind, but they didn't care. Ninth graders do not have an ego yet. So by the time you get to juniors and seniors and college students, they don't want to do that because they don't want to look like an idiot. But I think we'll learn more if we take a chance and make a prediction. Does anyone have a good idea why? Why do capacitors behave this way? Why?
It's Q equals CV.
All right, you're giving me a formula, but use words to explain it if you can.
Because the electric field between the plates is proportional to the charge. So the rate
That's
of
a
change-
great answer. My ninth graders wouldn't have said it that way, but they'd figured it out that way. So here's the way I usually explain something. So make it an analogy of something you do feel you understand, because we don't see electrons running in and out of capacitors. So picture your tire's flat on your car and you have a tire pump. And the only way you're going to get going is if you refill the tire. So you look at the tire and it's kind of flat, and you get out your hand operated pump, not an electric pump, and you hook it all up and you start pumping, and it's pretty easy. Pump, 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 pump. Pressure goes up to 20. You want to get the pressure to 30. Pump, and you find it's harder and harder to keep pumping more air into the tire. Why is that? Let's keep it to a tire and a pump, and you're like the voltage providing the oomph to fill your tire. Why is it harder to get the last bit of air into the tire than the first bit of air? Why?
Pressure's higher.
Or back
That's a
pressure.
good way to visualize it. And, it could be a soccer ball, a bicycle tire, but I think that's good. We kind of have the sense that it's easy to get the first amount of air in, but after you get more and more air in, it's restricting because it's creating like what we would think of as a back pressure. Is that an okay analogy for pumping up a tire? What's that going to do with a capacitor? What are you pumping into the capacitor? Charges. So Jeremy gave us the graduate school response to that. As you pump charges into the capacitor, it creates an electric field that's preventing, if it can, more charges from coming onto the plates. Jeremy, is that a decent third grade analogy?
Harder to put more charge on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's harder to get more charge on, just like it's harder to get your tire pressure up to 30. It's easy to get it up to 15, a little harder to 20, because the air in the tire is creating a back pressure. So the electrons on the capacitor plates, that's creating an electric field that's kind of opposing the generator. So what happens if you switch really, really fast? The capacitor doesn't ever kind of fill up. What if you switch really slowly? Then the capacitor fills with charge, pretty much fills with charge because it's so slow, and it prevents more charge. So it's opposing it. So if you switch it fast enough, the capacitor sort of looks like a conductor. How's that? Without getting into formulas.
That would be cool.
Is that a reasonable explanation, analogy?
Yeah.
Do I get a B plus? All right, let's keep going. All right. So capacitors, their behavior depends on the frequency of the generator. Is that okay? That's what this graph is predicting. So capacitors restrict, oppose current, and at low frequencies, there's a lot of restriction or resistance or reactance. So if I look at this graph now, the capacitive reactance, that's the resistance, is really high when the frequency is low. And if the capacitive reactance is high, it's like a narrow pipe, then not much current goes through. So these graphs are kind of opposite. The current is high when the reactance is low on a capacitor. The current is low when the reactance is high. Now, I don't want to go on to the next slide unless this slide really makes sense. This is the current passing through a capacitor and a resistor, but the resistor doesn't matter. Does this graph make sense? Look at the shape of the capacitive reactance. It's not a line, but the shape of the current is a line. Now, I don't want to get into the mathematics of that, but that's an important concept for us to remember. Okay, the current is proportional to the frequency here. Okay, higher frequency, you get more current for the same generator voltage. So what's your batting average at this point? We're still 1,000? That's good. All right. So this concept of capacitive reactance, then, if we look at a little more detail, the capacitive reactance of a capacitor depends on a couple of things. One of them must be frequency, but the other is also what's the size of the capacitor? So let's say I have a little bicycle tire or a truck tire. They're two very different, entities, but they're both tires. What if I have a little capacitor or a big capacitor? Big capacitor may be physically larger, maybe not, but maybe. So it turns out then that the reactance is inversely proportional. That is 1 over the capacitance of the capacitor. Now remember, we talked about what capacitors are and how capacitance is measured in the last part of the talk, and because that was a month ago, might have all been forgotten. So just visualize the capacitor as two parallel plates, the way we usually see it. And if the plates are physically larger, the capacitance goes up. It also depends on the distance between the plates, and that gets a little more complicated, but the bigger the capacitor, the bigger the denominator, right? The smaller the fraction, right? As the C goes up in the denominator, the fraction. So big capacitors would have less reactance. Sort of like big truck tires would have less resistance if you try to pump those up. But reactance is still measured in this weird unit called ohms. We didn't define ohms, but most hams assume they know something about the definition of an ohm. So this formula is a little tricky, especially for the ninth graders I taught, because it's an inverse. So as one goes up, the other goes down, and there's various ways we could demonstrate that. But if the frequency increases, basically the denominator gets bigger, so the fraction gets smaller. Low frequencies, capacitors, they fight that. High frequencies, capacitors have less resistance. So at higher frequencies, more current can flow through a capacitor and a resistor. So when I say can you explain that, I think we sort of did. Eventually, I want to come back to, if we have time, how this behavior affects an antenna. You think of an antenna like a capacitor. You have to in some way. Okay, so far.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so capacitors, the way we used to think of them is they're great ways to make an analog filter. All you need are, a couple of capacitors and resistors, and you can build filters. I remember I did this a bunch of years back because I wanted an audio filter that would restrict some of the high frequencies coming into my headphones. So if you build what's called a low pass filter, the capacitor is across the two wires going to your headphones or speaker. And remember we said what? Higher frequencies pass through the capacitor. But if they pass through the capacitor in this circuit, they won't get to my speaker or my headphones. So when I plug in this little filter, the high frequency tones, the hissy sounds on HF radios is decreased. So it acts like sort of a treble response. So they're very simple to make. You only need two components and a couple plugs and wires. So low pass filters are very popular because they're not very expensive to create, and human hearing is very dependent on the hissy pitch sounds. What if I reverse the C and the R? What if I put the C in the series and the R in the parallel side? So the R is across the output and the C is in series. That means anything that gets to my headphones has to get through that capacitor. Now what do we have? Do we still have a low pass filter?
Bypass filter.
Yeah. So if the capacitor is in series, anything that's going to get to my headphones has to get through that capacitor. So what happens? High frequencies easily get through capacitors. So now if I hook this up, I lose all the bass. This is like a bass reduction, thing. So again, the size of the capacitor depends on how much, but high frequencies, remember, tend to pass through, and the bass frequencies will have trouble getting through here. So if I plug this thing in, I'll lose the bass frequencies. So if I have a lot of low frequency hum, notably the old turntables would have this, they call them rumble filters, I think. Goes back to the 50s and 60s when I was a kid. So capacitors can be used as filters. Hams use these all the time. Okay, so let's jump to the next slide. So let's take a look at this thing we call an inductor. There's a whole lot of interesting physics related to inductors, or we just call them coils. So let's take a look at replacing the capacitor with a coil. And just like my ninth graders would have said, okay, teacher Barry, close the switch. Some current's going to go through the circuit. As you increase the frequency of the circuit generator there, that circle with a little sine wave means a AC generator. So make a prediction as the frequency of the generator goes up, at constant voltage, I should say. How will the current vary in this circuit? So we're going to come back to our graph, and I want you Mountain to make a graph of the AC current. Remember, here's the circuit. Graph the current versus the frequency of the generator. So take a piece of scrap paper, napkin, and sketch that. Show it to your neighbor and see if your neighbor agrees with you. I'll go back to the drawing here. As the frequency goes up, some current has to get through the inductor, the current meter, the resistor. You know, my ninth graders had a good question at this point when I showed them something like this. They said, Teacher Barry, wouldn't it make a difference where you put the current meter? What if you put it on the other side of the resistor? I said, well, we have to do that, you know, to convince you. But that was a great question. They wanted to know sort of why are we assuming the current's the same everywhere in the circuit? I said, oh, that's a great question. Maybe we shouldn't assume. Let's hook it up with 3 ammeters, measure the current everywhere in the circuit. And we did that. And it really surprised them that basically when you close the switch, the current's the same everywhere. Now, the effect of the current isn't the same, but the current's the same.
Yeah, I always get that with my students who think, oh, that's first, so it's going to get, you know, the best.
Yeah, well, you know, if you're in the food line, if you're in front, you get more of the good stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, an easy way to show that is you just plug in a string of Christmas tree lights, and they're all equal brightness. Not the first one is the brightest, and they get dimmer.
My ninth graders would say, no, that's not true. The first one's brightest, but it happens so fast we can't see it. It's like,
Well, technically, the first one does light up first. You just don't see it. Yeah, it's
well, I don't want to talk about electric fields with ninth graders, but anyway, come back to this. Take a minute, make a sketch, and talk to your neighbor. Maybe a different neighbor. If your neighbor won't talk to you, change your seat. I'm gonna get some apple juice.
Because that's, yeah.
It's gonna go start high,
Start
go
high, end up low, higher frequency, less current.
This is the opposite.
Yeah, it's the opposite current.
I don't understand. That's one of the things I do.
Because it's a short.
Yeah, so I'm hearing some good conversations. I don't want to interrupt that. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Maybe it was a
inductor-
group of 6 are coming up with one solution. It's like Congress. I shouldn't say that. Does everyone agree?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, so did everyone agree on a shape sort of like this? It's not a line, by the way, because a line will have a definite zero current. So as the frequency is very, very low with the inductor, now let's go back what we've got. Why can low frequencies get through the coil, but as the frequency gets higher, the coil's resistance tends to go up because we know the resistor doesn't change. So did I say that correctly? At higher frequencies, it's harder to get current through that coil. Why?
The magnetic field around the coil is going in and out, and you get back EMF because of that.
All right, so that's Jeremy's answer as a college professor. How about the rest of you? How would normal mortal hams answer that question? Why do you get more current through an inductor?
They're all doing their hands the same way.
Yeah, so when I worked with ninth graders, we would put a DC current through a coil and see that it makes a magnetic field. They thought, that's really weird. I said, yeah, that is really weird, like, you know. So if we got more current, the magnetic field got stronger, and if we moved a compass around, you could sort of map that. So I said, well, let's take the battery and just switch the polarity. And we undid the battery and, you know, switched it, and the compass pointed in the other direction. They said, oh, that's weird. I said, yeah, it sure is weird. So I hooked up a battery to a switch where we could go back and forth. So as we went back and forth, we saw the compass needle back and forth, you know, changing. He said, so in other words, that thing we call a magnetic field, whatever the hell that is, you know, when the current goes one way through the coil, it makes a north-south in one position. But when we switch the direction of the current, like in AC, the magnetic field collapses and builds up the other way. So I said, well, that's sort of like, we studied earlier in the fall this concept of inertia. It's sort of like inertia, isn't it? If you wiggle your finger, it's pretty easy to wiggle your finger here. How about wiggle your whole wrist? That's harder. How about wiggle from your elbow? That hurts. How about your whole arm? That really hurts. How about your body? So inductance sort of behaves in a circuit the way mass or inertia does in mechanics. They thought that was pretty cool. So inductors oppose changes in current. That's different from changes in voltage like capacitors. So how about if we say it this way? As charges pass through the conductor, the coil generates a magnetic field. Does the resistor also generate a magnetic field?
Little bit.
A little. So it gets enhanced for some reason in the coil. So then my ninth graders would almost always say, well, how about if we build a bigger coil? I said, okay, here's some wire, build a bigger coil. And they, wrap the wire in, like a 1 foot diameter. And then we replaced my little coil with this big coil. And man, that made much more, magnetic field. And we could see that by moving the magnet farther. So they said, it looks like the thing you call inductance, depends on how big our wire is. I said, good, that's a great, understanding. So this thing called inductance depends on the physical size of the coil. We know as hams, you want an 80-meter coil, the coil is this big. You want a 2-meter coil, the coil is, this big. So anyway, this thing generates magnetic fields for some, weird reason. But in AC, the current's continually changing direction. And if it changes direction slowly, the coil has one opposition. But if you change the current more rapidly, the current fights that. So the current changes are more difficult with higher frequency. So in other words, it looks like the coil is behaving in the opposite way of the capacitor. Whoa, that's like mind-blowing right there. So what does that mean if it's opposite? It means those two must do interesting things in certain circuits. So inductors resist change in current, okay? And the faster the current changes, the more the coil resists. So let's call that resistance inductive reactance. I don't know why. It's just a word. It's a name. It's still measured in ohms. So what does the inductive reactance depend on? Well, obviously, we know after playing with these things, it depends on two things. How fast you change the frequency and how big you make the coil. So that's like a mind-blowing, conclusion. So for an inductor, the inductive reactance is related to the frequency and the inductance L. The inductance L, just think of as, for now, just how big the coil is. Bigger coil, more wire, more inductance. It's sort of like the difference between wagging your finger and wagging your wrist. But a capacitor's reactance is 1 over 2 pi fc. So as the frequency goes up, the XL goes up on the inductor. But as the frequency goes up, the X sub C goes down. They do opposite things. High, low, low, high. So the inductor's reactance increases with frequency. The capacitor's reactance decreases with frequency. Are we okay so far? We're 2/3 of the way home.
Yes.
Through the talk. You okay so far? Anyone want to spout a question before I get to the next slide, obviously? We good so far? Anyone asleep? I can't see, you're so little.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good, okay.
Storm.
What's your batting average so far? Still 1,000?
300?
Yeah, that's still.
All right, that's good. So let's quickly summarize and then get to the end of this talk. So resistors in an AC circuit, basically, they don't care about the frequency. Capacitors in an AC circuit, higher frequency, the capacitors, will allow more current to go through. But inductors, the opposite. The higher frequency, inductors tend to restrict or oppose that current. So if we look at this thing called resistance and reactance, now watch out what I'm plotting here is resistance, reactance, and reactance, not the current. So the resistance of a resistor is just flat. The reactance of an inductor goes up with frequency in a linear way. And now this last one's critical. The reactance of a capacitor decreases, but as a curve or an inverse. Or some might look at that and say, oh, that's a hyperbola, something, but it's not a line. So in order to get the current really, really, really low, like zero, the capacitor has to be, teeny, teeny, teeny. So do these graphs make sense? Resistance is flat for a resistor. Resistance is linear going up, positive slope for an inductor. And reactance is decreasing as frequency goes up for a capacitor. Okay so far?
Yes,
We're getting to the end of the talk.
and the test.
All right, so we don't have to go over this. We just talked about all this. So now let's look at a circuit that contains all three components, an R, a C, and an L. And let's put them this way in series. Now, it doesn't make any difference. My ninth graders would say right away, what if you reverse the L and the C? I said, okay, so let's make a prediction, try it, and then I'll let you guys rewire it. So what I had so much fun with ninth graders with, they would throw out all kinds of ideas that the seniors wouldn't even care about. It's just like, tell me what we need to know for the test, Teacher Perry. I said, no, I'm not going to behave that way. I want you to understand this. Because the test is going to probably be something you've not seen before, but you ought to be able to figure out. And, after 3 or 4 or 5 months of that, they realized you can't just memorize answers for Barry's physics class. So let's look at this as a R and a C and an L in series. And there's some ammeter that's still stuck in there. And the frequency generator can, put out a constant 1 volt or something like that. So you see where I'm going with this. As we generate different frequencies, the current has to get through all components. It has to get through, well, the switch has got to close, right? Teacher Barry, close the switch. It's got to get through the C, it's got to get through the L, it's got to get through the ammeter, and it's got to get through the resistor and back to the generator. So here we go. In an RLC circuit, what happens when we have a series circuit? It's a resistor, capacitor, inductor. So at first, I'll give you a little clue. At first, the capacitor allows the charge to flow, but at first the coil is going to oppose the current because the current's going from 0 to something. So at first, that capacitor is going to be unhappy. So here, as the frequency increases, how do the R and the C and the L components behave as a group? Because, hey, the current's got to get through all 3 of these for that ammeter to read. So here comes the quiz. You ready? Obviously. So here's our same graph, an AC current versus frequency. Now predict the shape of this graph when we have this circuit. And I'll give you guys 1 minute to do it. Show each other your graph and see if you can explain why you drew that kind of graph. I'll leave this up. So sketch a graph, show it to your neighbor, see if your neighbor agrees, check with your other neighbors, see if as a group, as a class here, class of hams, you can come up with one answer to this question and see if your batting average is still 1,000. Then you have to explain why. At every test, I'd have, a little section, a question, and a little white box. Say, tell me how you're going to solve this problem in words, in just plain English. The Chinese kids hated that, by the way, because their English was bad. But, I had a box and it says, tell me how you're going to solve this problem. And then below that was another box. I said, now show me all your math and calculations, or what's your answer? They hated that. They really hated that. But I forced them to do that all year long. Tell me how you're going to solve the problem in plain English. Now show me your work. So if you have a sketch, see if you can explain why you have that shape to your neighbor.
Yeah.
Oh, I got it, but I can't explain it.
You can't explain it? What's the sketch?
I don't know if it's right.
Yeah.
We'll go up for a while and come back down.
At low frequencies, the capacitor is gonna resist the current a great deal. And so the current is gonna be low. At very high frequencies, the capacitor is gonna look like it's not even there, but the coil at high frequencies will resist the current so that it's going to be very low. So somewhere in the middle, there's a place where the capacitor passes more current than it did at low frequencies. And the inductor is gonna resist less than it did at high frequencies. So the current's it's gonna peak, so you're gonna have a humpback curve.
It's like Goldilocks, right? Not too hot, not too cold.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So I heard that, and that was a very nice explanation. Do all of you agree with that summary in terms of the rationale? I heard it's going to be like a hump.
Good job.
So at low frequencies, what dominates the reactance?
Capacitor.
The
The
capacitor,
capacitor. And at high frequencies, what dominates the reactance?
the inductor.
Coil.
And when does the resistor affect anything?
Same everywhere.
It's pretty much flat, so that doesn't matter. In fact, I could take the R out, couldn't I? So that means there's sort of like a Goldilocks frequency where the most current, I don't know how much current because I didn't put any numbers on these, but the current should be maximum somewhere at a mid frequency.
Yeah.
Beautiful explanation. So at some frequency, the current in the circuit is a maximum, and we might call that current a special value called the resonant current. Is that a fair term for hams? A resonant frequency current?
Yeah.
No, I'm not asking you to define the shape of this mathematically, although we could do that, but that's not the point of this talk. Low frequencies just don't work well. High frequencies don't work well, but some mid-range frequency might get through both the capacitor and inductor without being totally obliterated. Is that a okay summary?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see it.
So one more part of the quiz here. So I want you to define the word resonance in words. Don't show me a formula, but at least in words.
When you're marching across the bridge and you match the
No,
resonance.
wait, Jeremy. Let's give everyone a chance to talk to their neighbor first. Yeah. We know the resonance destroys the bridge. Yeah. So in terms of the RLC circuit, what is resonance?
It's the point at which the current is maximum.
When you're.
Well, yeah, I
you're
guess
on
that's the
speed.
obvious. That's the
Right.
obvious. But
No,
maybe
right.
can you
See.
take that I'd give that a correct answer, but can you take that one step deeper and say why in terms of this thing we've talked about all night called reactance? The current is maximum or resonance. Now the question is why? We'll finish up in 5 minutes.
You have two variable resistors in series with one another. Basically, right?
The
One
spectral
resistor
balance,
going up and the other one going down, so at the point where they're about equal.
that's exactly when XL equals XC.
All righty. So, yeah, you got it. So, since there are two components in series, the current's got to get through both. It can't get around one, right? So, where the capacitor's reactance matches the inductor's reactance, there has to be some point where the line crosses the curve. At that point, we call that point the resonant frequency. Now, here's the little trick. Because the current leads the voltage in one and lags the voltage in the other, at that point, this might be part 3, at that point, the reactance cancels and the circuit behaves as though it has no reactance. It's like, wait a minute, we can say the XL and the XC are equal and opposite in sign to each other, so they cancel. Only at that frequency will they cancel. If it's a lower frequency, the XL, dominates. So what do we have here? We have a situation where if we have coils and capacitors and a resistor, we can adjust the C or the L or both to have a frequency that is resonant. And that's the way we used to tune, old AM radios and stuff. Have a simple circuit where you can vary the C or vary the L or vary both. Or have plug-in coils. My first radio, you could plug in coils. Well, not while they were powered. I found that out the hard way. You don't plug in while you have power on. It's like, you idiot. I was 12 years old. I probably should have gotten killed a couple times in my teenage years from electricity, but yeah. Okay. So where they cross, that's called resonance. So where the XL equals the X sub C, or you could say XL minus XC is 0. So that leaves the combination resistance called, now my ninth graders always would, that was the impedance of the circuit, teacher Barry. They just love to be able to say it's the impedance. So I let them, it wasn't worth the fight. So the impedance becomes a pure resistance at the resonant frequency only. Does that make sense? Did I lose anyone on that last 2 or 3 screens? So resonance is a condition where if the circuit elements are in series, now, the maximum current occurs at the resonant frequency. But that's only if the 3 components are in series. It works out very differently if they're in parallel with each other, like in an antenna trap or some other things. We still batting 1,000.
We're in resonance with one another.
Resonance is when. So is every wire antenna resonant at some frequency?
Mhm.
It has to be. Could it be resonant at multiple frequencies? Could it be?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I should say, must it be? Yeah. So, we know like a center-fed dipole on 40 meters works great on 15 meters too. It's resonant, but it's 3 half waves long. So it turns out for center-fed dipoles, a 1/2 dipole works really well. It's cheap. You just get the wire up in a tree. But a 3 half wave dipole also works. A 5 half waves, a 7 half waves. So what I found out from just trial and error, and then someone said, of course you should have known that, a 40-meter dipole, if you have it at the right length, will work really well on 6 meters. How can a 40-meter dipole work? Well, 7 megahertz and 50 megahertz.
7 harmonics.
So it's the 7th harmonic. It's 7 half waves long. Now, it might go out in a direction you don't want it. I'm not saying a great 6-meter antenna is a 40-meter antenna. But in a pinch, you can get by with it and a half. So the formulas, we can go into the formulas, but I don't think that means anything for us. 1/2 pi square root of LC. So as you vary the L or the C and then take the square root of it, it's not too critical. It's pretty easy to get a tuned circuit on 40 and 80 meters. So impedance is just a combination of resistance and reactance. And that's, I think, where I should finish this. Yeah. All right, let me close slideshow. Stop sharing. So Jeremy, I tossed the whole first thing I sent you because it went into series and parallel and energy, and I thought, great for a physics class, awful for a ham class. Any questions, comments, or whatever? Everyone still awake?
Yeah, yeah.
Did anyone learn anything, or was this all just baby talk?
Reminiscent. Reminiscent.
So what happens in the parallel? You have a resistor, capacitor, and inductor in parallel with each other.
Yeah, that would be a great extra credit question. If you put the capacitor and inductor in a parallel circuit with a resistor, how does the circuit behavior change now? And it's very, very different, isn't it? Does anyone want to think about that, or you want to start heading home?
What do you say? Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very resonant.
Yeah, so at low frequencies, the inductor acts like a dead short, so you get a lot of current.
Yeah.
At high frequencies, the capacitor acts like a dead short, so you get a lot of current. It's the middle, it's the resonant
The
where
resonant frequency is the toughest, isn't it?
XL and XC are the same. They're both pulling current, but they're pulling current in opposite directions, which means the sum of them is 0. So that means the only current that's making it through is what's getting through the resistor. So that means that the impedance is maximum at the resonant frequency.
So Jeremy, that was a superb explanation, of course, from Jeremy. Where might you want to use that kind of a circuit as a ham.
Notch filter, cut
Yeah.
out interference at a certain frequency.
Or in my case, because I was building antennas by hand, a trap and a trap antenna. So a trap allows what? It disengages certain frequencies from getting through the trap. So if you look at a multi-trap dipole, the inner one might be the 40-meter trap, you know, and as you go out in longer lengths, the current can get through the inductor in the trap, but it can't get through the capacitor as easily. So you can have an 80 and 40 and 20-meter antenna with one wire, but a couple of traps. Now in today's market, the traps probably would cost you more than extra wire. So I probably wouldn't today build, you know, a 5-trap dipole. It's if I buy them commercially, they're expensive. But if I try to make them, it's hard to get it physically all set up. I would just put 4 dipoles in parallel. You know, more wire. Wire's cheap compared to traps.
Even won't say the people.
Fan dipole.
Yeah.
Yeah, fan dipole. I didn't say that. Yeah, so a dipole where there's one coax, one balun, but you know, 4 sets of wires running off at different angles and different lengths. So when current comes through on 20 meters, the only dipole that's going to get any current is the 20-meter dipole. The others would be such an impedance mismatch, it would not take any current or much current.
All
All right, so that was my talk tonight, and it was a little more
The most what you see now.
ham friendly than what I had originally planned.
Yeah, thanks, Barry.
Thank
Any
you,
other
Barry.
questions?
That was very, very interesting.
Thank you. I don't know where to aim these talks to you guys because, you know, you don't want to aim too low or, you know, aim too high. Aiming too high is easy for me because the math is always easy. So, yeah. That's not the point for ham radio.
So you're saying there's a part 3.
There could be like, so how are capacitors used in antenna tuners? What's a conjugate match? That really gets into some hairy, you know, complex impedances, which they're harder to understand. I mean, mathematicians are easy with this stuff, but you know, then to explain it to a 3rd grader is pretty hard. How can you use a coil or a capacitor to tune an antenna from your shack? How?
You're not tuning an antenna.
You're just making the transmitter happy.
Yeah, well, that's probably a very, you know, correct answer, but how do you make the rig work with one wire in a tree on multiple frequencies? You can do it with capacitors and inductors in your shack. You don't have to put the things out in the tree. So part 3 could be somewhere in the future, like let's open up antenna tuners and then figure out how they work. Pi networks, T networks, Z networks, all kinds of ways. But capacitors and coils, basically, I think Dennis would say it this way, they changed the phase. But that doesn't mean we mortals would understand what that means. The current lags the voltage, the current leads the voltage. By messing with capacitors and inductors in your shack, you can make the rig see what looks like, well, I should say it is 50 ohms resistance, no reactance. So the radio doesn't care what it's feeding. It'll put out, you know, the full 100 watts, even though you have, you know, a 39-foot wire in a tree. Easy to do. Random wires work just as well as tuned wires, if you can load them. All righty.
All right, thank you, Barry.
I have a short drive home. I should say I really enjoyed the Kibberton Hamfest. You guys did a spectacular job.
Yeah, Bob did a great job with the Ham Fest, and he's here.
Yeah.
Absolutely, so thanks to all you guys for help, so.
I gave away, I didn't sell, I gave away about 10 antenna tuners. And I had them out on the table. You may have seen me on that, near the C-card table. And if someone walked by and I could tell they looked at one, I said, you know what that is? Oh yeah, that's a MARC antenna tuner. I said, pick it up and see how heavy it is. Picks it up. I said, could you use one of those? He said, yeah. How much are you asking for it? I said, no, now it's yours. He said, what? He said, what? I said, no, you could pick it up. You knew what it was. You think you can use it. That's good enough for me. It's yours now.
You put super glue on the sides, we put.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, one guy I gave something to, he says, I can't do this. I need to give you $20. I said, no, give $20 to Mark. Go up to the front of the desk and make a donation. I don't know if he did. Yeah.
Probably did, yeah.
Yeah.
There's some guy named Mark who took $20.
Yeah. Oh, and the last tuner was a beautiful Dentron from the 1970s, and no one wanted it, and I was getting desperate. So I remember I brought it up, Bob or someone was up there, and I said, just give this away. Make it one of your door prizes. I know it works. You know, it wasn't broken in any way.
Whether we
You
did
remember that? I forget who I gave it to.
Or one of the vendors.
So that was one of the giveaways. I think it was VEE, WA3 VEE, Ron. He lives in Westchester. I think he won that. I don't know if he picked it up. Anyway, I didn't want to take it home for sure. So I gave it away. All right, guys. Good night. Thank you. I hope you get home safely.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, see you next time.
It's like the, one of the bringing
Part 3.
Oh, yeah. Capacitors and antennas.
Yeah, I've got more active lately.
Before everybody disappears, can I ask a technical question?
Sure.
Unless you or something else. you want to-
No,
Alright, so I noticed on my gray line map on my FT8 software, but it has a gray line. You know, normally when you look at the gray line, it's sinusoidal across the country or the world, actually, right? But I noticed now it's kind of vertical and it goes flat on the
because we're
bottom.
near the equinox.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, so you think about the
equinox, you know.
Oh, we got a board.
Right around now, so then, right, you know, here's the Earth, right, here's the rotation axis, and here's
The
sunlight coming in, so the day-night line is pretty much like that.
Yeah.
So if you project this out onto a map, what you'll see is almost vertical lines
Yeah.
separate night and day.
Yeah.
And now if you wait until, let's say, the summer, now the northern hemisphere is tilted like that, so now you get more light up here. So now the gray line map looks more like, because now in the northern hemisphere, you have midnight sun, you got 24-hour sunlight. Because when the Earth goes around, you're always pointing towards the sun, and Antarctica is always pointing away from the sun. That's actually the right way.
I figured it was something along that line.
And then the winter is the other way around.
So why didn't I mean, it seems to happen slow enough that it's like one day you just turn it on and it's like vertical. You know, it's not like you see it, it's gradually going that way, but it has to be.
On the equinox,
Yeah.
which we just passed 3 days ago.
Yeah, 3 days. Right.
2 or 3 days ago.
So that happens
Yes.
twice a year, doesn't it?
Yes, you get the dead vertical lines twice a year, and then it's vertical. It
I
goes
mean, I
across.
actually updated the software and then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, yeah, this is right, I think. I don't know why, but it seems right. Yeah. There we go.
Well, now all the flat earthers are gonna get pissed out.
Thank you.
You said you worked in New Zealand on Canada?
I worked 10, yeah, New Zealand, I
How are you doing?
he wants to be in town.
I've been listening to 10 a little bit.
It's
And the-
nuts.
And my antennas are, you know, I'm becoming more active, even though I have a horrendous noise level. But, the most common antenna that I've worked, and this is mostly CW, is an amp-fed wire.
Yeah.
Seems like everybody, not just soda people, you know.
Oh, you mean other hands at home?
Yeah, well, yeah, because I'm not, if it's all working.
Yeah,
You know.
oh, yeah, I always, I leave my filters
So
open.
the other thing is, the other night, I was listening on 10, and I tuned down to CW, the CW portion. And I heard one signal. And it was a JA,
Yeah, Japan, yeah.
one signal. I called it, you know, I was here for 10 months. No. I looked him up on QRZ. This guy, first of all, he lives on top of a mountain. He has a 100-foot tower. And he had get this, a monoband 9-element 10-meter speed. With a 50-foot boom.
Oh, yeah.
He had all this on his
The
website.
in the KW, is the United States the only?
And he was working at KW, that's right.
Is that universal worldwide KW? Because I mean,
1.5.
like the South Americans, they can't possibly be compliant with that.
I don't,
You know?
but that's what,
Yeah.
he was working people, and so I listened to him say at KW, but his QRZ webpage
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
said he runs a KW, and he had all these pictures of of the package, the beam is a commercial beam.
Oh.
Made by I think it's a Japanese company.
Hmm.
But yeah, pictures from the boxes arriving to all the
Oh.
assembly to raising it, and there were two guys up on the tower, as I recall, but raising it up and. Oh my gosh, can you imagine a 9-element beam on 10 meters?
I just watched a video of a guy who had a crank up tower, a 50-foot crank up tower at his remote site.
Yeah, remote.
Right, and he was up there, he wasn't doing much, I don't know what he was doing, I think he said he was adding outriggers to use as driven elements for an antenna beside the tower.
Okay.
Right, and he pulled it or yanked it and one cable gave loose. And all the top sections came down at the same time, and he was next to it on a man crane, he wasn't on the tower, probably would have killed him if he'd been on the tower. Yeah.
All right, maybe we should close out the official meeting.
Yeah.
We'll say goodnight to the folks on YouTube.
Folks,
Please join us again in October. We'll have Alan Johnston telling us about the latest in amateur radio at Villanova. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next month.
What kind of competition?